So welcome everybody to Threading and Deeper Learning. This is Rima Al-Tawil, and we have the community agreements that you are welcome to contribute to. I'm gonna post the link into the chat, and you're welcome to actually contribute to them or just suggest new ones. You're welcome here regardless of race, ethnicity, background, disability, sexual orientation, and anything. We always assume positive intentions and critique ideas, not people. And we make space for others. So uh, feel free to always come as you are. Um, eating, children, family members are always welcome. And if at any time during the session you are not feeling that your access needs are not met, feel free to private message me or Ken. We will always be able to support you. And I think we're all set to start. So I'm gonna hand over to Rima so she can get us started.
Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time for being with us today, wherever you are, whatever time you are in, or time zone you are in. I'm just trying to share my screen. So let me know if you're seeing it. There we go.
Looks great.
Looks good. Okay. And the title of this session is Threading and Deeper Learning, but this is the first of 3 sessions. And the title of this one particularly is called Threading Humanity Back into the Fabric of Education. I'm not going to talk about myself right now. I just want to dive deeper into, because we will be talking about ourselves in a second. So the next sessions, I just want to mention to everybody, and hopefully for the people who will catch the recording, that the next session will be on Wednesday, and it's session number 2 of Threading and Deeper Learning. And this one is called In the Age of Deep Learning. Where does deeper learning fit? And the third one is going to be on Wednesday, August 26th, and it's about weaving deeper learning through reflexivity. All these are very related to my doctoral topic, of course, but these are things that I have experienced firsthand when I engaged in such activities myself for my doctoral research and beyond. So before we begin, I really encourage everybody to chime in, and this is where I'm going to say what we're going to do, and then probably we can record. We can stop the recording and dive deeper into what we want to do. So before we begin, let's hear from everybody. I told you how I got into doing this. It wasn't something that was in the books for me. I am very much a city girl living in Toronto, so I never thought that I will be doing any of the weaving or any knitting or anything like that. But when I started doing it, it brought some memories about childhood memories and things that I have done. And they are very related to who I am, my background, my identity, which I will talk about a little bit. But let's hear from everybody first. Have you had any experiences with thread-based crafts? And just a little note here, when I was doing my research about it, it turns out that in my background, it's more like a feminine activity, but there are some parts of the world where it is a man's job to do the knitting and weaving and all of that. So it's not gender related or connected to any gender. So you might have seen somebody, watched somebody, played with the threads yourself, whatever that is. Let's pause the recording right now and let's right here. And one idea was mentioned is the culture. And that is very much related to my culture as well. But when I was doing my studies, I discovered that it's related to almost every culture. And more often than not, it is basically a social activity. Somebody said that they've never heard of finger knitting before. Neither did I. So although I learned how to do that thing, I never knew how to finger knit, or I'd never known that it was called finger knitting. And I saw it in one article that I'm going to talk to you about. But if you have a thread, let's engage in finger knitting and continue to talk about ourselves while we're doing the finger knitting. So basically, what it requires is that with your non-dominant hand, if you have a thread, try it. With your non-dominant hand, just place it between your thumb and your palm, and just like weave the thread behind your index, over your middle finger, behind your ring finger, and then over your pinky. Turn it around, like as you're seeing in the pictures. Turn it around and do it the opposite way right now. The opposite way. So it's going the opposite way, over, under, over, under. Turn it around, back, over, under, over, under. It's very simple. Little kids do it. And over, under, until we have 2 rows on each finger. Just that's what we're going to do right now. And let's pause the recording and see if anybody move it over the one that is on top and over your finger. So the row at the bottom, we are going to pull it a little bit and make it move over the finger to the back. So we're knitting to the back right now. And some people call it also weaving, but I did other types of weaving. That's the Métis weaving. And I'm learning these things. I didn't know about them before. And we're going to move it to the back again and to the back again. And we end up with 1 row. It's going to be loose, and that's fine. We are going to tighten it. And then again, this time we are going to go over, under, not this one, sorry. This one that's here. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, until we have 2 rows again. 2 rows again. And then with the 2 rows, we move the one to the bottom, to the top, the one to the bottom, to the top, and we continue finger weaving. That's all about it. That's all that it is, but it requires a little bit of repetition. So this is my string. I have only one row. I'm going like over, under, and again, over, under. I have 2 rows. The bottom one goes over the top one and to the back of the finger. And this is where the weaving is happening, or the knitting is happening, in the back. We're going to continue with the recording right now.
Yep, I put it on now to get that recorded. I'll pause it up as we're doing an interaction for you, Rima.
Yeah,
so
okay,
you don't
thank
have
you
to
so
tell me.
much. There are some discussions. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So now that we know how to finger weave, I'm going to continue finger weaving while we are having some discussions. And this is what we are going to end up having. So eventually, we put them one on top of the other, and we have something that is a long finger knitted piece that looks like the bottom picture that we have here. So looking at it, what can we use this for? It looks like just like a silly activity, right? What can we use it for? Actually, I wrote here at the bottom of this page that we can use this for a multitude of things. But let's continue finger weaving and talk about something else. I told you before we begin, let's hear from everybody. Now, while we're finger weaving, did this spark any memories for anybody? And I want to hear a story. Anybody, a story about weaving, about knitting, about playing with threads, about watching, anything. Let's hear a story.
I'll pause up here.
Curiosity, keeping fingers busy. Curiosity, culture, keeping fingers busy. And I hope, Christina, you're still doing that. And memories, and something about the identity, but also focus. We are in the moment, but I'm going to talk about that in a second, right? Are we all academics here? If we are not, probably we've been learners. So if you want to think about your role in academia, which one would you pick? You can write in the chat, you can put your hand up, anything you want, or we can stop the recording. Would you describe a hairband? The others The others are crafts for little kids. Teachers use them for like making octopus, little bunnies, butterflies, and I saw plenty of other things. Some people, like for a housewife, for example, myself, I was very much interested in making them like placemats. All right, let's put it all together. We are academic people. We also have a background, a culture, a childhood. Like we have memories. We were not just like born in academia. We come to academia bringing stuff with us. So in our academic setting, how would we describe if there's any relevance, connection, or integration of those credit activities that we engaged in? At least we watched or we engaged in. It brings something to us. It means something to us. Those crafts, is there any relevance connection? Have we ever made that connection? Have we ever integrated thread-based activities into our teachings and learnings? If so, in what context and what purpose? And here we're going to pause. Can you see lenses through which we start examining pedagogical strategies and we promote inclusive learning? Because learning is not always only cognitive. Right? It's affectionate. Right now, when we talked about the culture, it brought some affections, it brought some memories. It's about who we are as people. And that is what I'm going to talk about when I say in the age of deep learning. Where does deeper learning fit? What do we mean by deeper learning? And how do we bring it up in our students as well, and the learners and ourselves as perpetual learners? So as a metaphor, it's used in the pedagogical literature as well. I'm going to talk about two pieces of literature. There are many more, and one of the latest publications that I published a few months ago, but I'm going to focus on only two here. The first one is one that I really like. It's called Weaving Equity, Belonging, and Powerful Authority for Pacifica into the Law Schools and University. That's in New Zealand. Somebody mentioned New Zealand right now, I think. It's also about the culture, right? So here, the author or the researcher, MY I hope I'm pronouncing their name correctly. They used the act of weaving as a metaphor. They talked about weaving a carpet or a mat or a rug. And they used the weaving as a symbol for the integration of various strands representing different experiences, challenges, and cultural backgrounds into a cohesive whole. So if you notice, to weave this one, for example, I used different separate strands, different colors, but when I put it together, it became one entity, one whole. And we use the idea or the symbolism of weaving when we want to say that. Several strands from different places as well. Here he suggested, or the author suggested, that by weaving together these diverse strands, they focused on law schools. Law schools become more inclusive and more equitable for a certain people, a number of people who come from a certain place, which is the Pacific Islands, and they have a specific heritage like the Samoa. That is one example. Another example, and that is what inspired the title and my learning of how to finger knit. It's called What's Finger Knitting, and that is the Chinese pre-service teacher's initial professional experience in Australian early childhood education. Here, the pre-service, there's an example of a pre-service or a case study of a pre-service individual. Her name was Sue. She comes from it. She knows English really very well, and she comes from a background of Chinese background where she learned in a very formal and rigid way. And she started doing her pre-service and as an early child educator in an Australian kindergarten or preschool. And the child came to her and said, "I want to finger knit," which is a common activity there, right? Like it's based on playing. And she was like, "What does that mean?" and she didn't understand what it means. And this tactile activity became more like this symbolism that illustrates the complex process that she and other Chinese teachers went through as they tried to blend their traditional Chinese teaching methods with the informal, play-based approach of Australian early childhood education. So finger knitting in this particular context, it became a symbol to the teacher's effort to navigate and reconcile differences in culture, pedagogical strategies, and philosophies between two educational systems, and reflecting their challenges in integrating new practices within their existing knowledge. It touched on their identity, who they are, and who they were becoming as educators, and who they wanted to be as they continued with this type of praxis. But not only that, we talked about the symbolism and the metaphor, but in the literature, I found a lot of examples that use the literal act of doing some fiber crafts or threaded arts or whatever that is, where they use it in their classrooms or to teach or to bring in certain concepts. So some experienced educators, when they did that, they suggest that tactile learning humanizes education. And that's why we're talking about bringing humanity or the human aspect back to the educational realm, right? So because it's a hands-on and it's embodied, we aren't only cognition. As I said, we are embodied human beings. And by using this approach, they were able to promote deeper engagement with meaning making, identity formation. In the case of Sue, it was both. It was a symbol, and then it became an act, an action, and it touched on their identity as well. Self-expression. I wanted to express themselves in these colors. If Ken wants to do it or anybody else wants to do it, they might choose different colors. And every color might mean something to them. I'm not going to tell you what each means to me, but they do mean stuff. And stuff related, probably they're the favorite colors of my kids. You never know. We color code everything in our house. I have 4 children. I color code their plates. I color code their socks. I color code everything. And you never know, probably these are the colors. All right. And empathy, community connections. My childhood memory when it comes to knitting is that my mom, my aunt, and my grandma, and my other aunt, and the neighbor would sit together and they would knit together. They would form like a knitting circle, if you've heard of something like that, right? It's about community coming together as well. Speaking of all of this, have you had any inspirations? Thinking of your classes. Let's talk what inspired. Let's talk a little bit about what inspired me. A writer, a practitioner who teaches in service and pre-service, Donna Anderson. She's a she. I Googled her and I spoke with her as well. And my supervisor spoke with her. She wrote a blog which was called Why More Colleges Should Focus on Knitting. And that was a series of blogs, I think, but one of them was this one, in which she used knitting with pre-service teachers as a practical embodiment of the pedagogical theories that they will apply in their profession. She wanted them to learn, men, women, it didn't matter. She wanted them to learn how to knit and to practice it so that they understand what it means for a student to come from not knowing anything at all and improving. She wanted them to experience, not to be comfortable, but to experience learning something without having prior knowledge, because it seems this group did not knit at all before. Another one that inspired me is called our 2 writers, Boone and Pentney. And they had this article called Knitting the Feminist Self, Craftism, Yarn Bombing, if you know what that is, and the Navigation of Feminist Spaces. In this article, they talked about knitting in the classroom that opens up the space for challenging conversations and alternative ways of learning. So they made their students, all of them, to knit in the classroom. This is when they sat as a community and they started talking about challenging ideas. And they used knitting as a powerful tool for social change, collaboration and critical self-reflection and social justice as well. I didn't write it here, especially because yarn bombing, where people make, have you heard of what yarn bombing is? Yeah. So yarn bombing is also used for that. But what about STEM? I thought that probably this is only in social sciences or, you know, humanities, but what about STEM? It turns out that some educators who are focused on the STEM, which is the science and the technology and the engineering and mathematics, they started using as well threaded art, especially crochet. Here, for example, and the first one that we're talking about, Kuhn's 2024, they explored the connection between computational thinking and the materiality of working with threads. And I don't know if that was expanded beyond that, and that's why it's very famous in the world of computers. But I read a lot of articles that followed this one about using threads and using threaded arts in with computers as well while learning computers. Thompson's 2022, and these are all very new. Like I think the ones that are very, very recent, highlights the innate mathematical thinking embodied in weaving. I didn't know that, but it's all based on patterns, and I had to learn it as well. And this underscores the potential of fiber crafts to humanize mathematics, making it more accessible and more enjoyable for learners, particularly, as they said, female learners, where they started to incorporate it, even having a camp where they teach crochet and math, or math through crochet. And this is what York et al. Did as well, where they discussed the efficacy of crocheting as an approach for teaching mathematical concepts. And that's not it, but these are some recent examples where these were incorporated within different areas of the educational system. Let's have a little bit of a discussion and we can pause the recording, right? Again, I don't know anything about it. My mom taught me how to knit when I was probably like before my teen age, like early, I don't know, 11. I learned how to do Canva weaving and how to do like knitting, but that was just like because this is what girls did 50 years ago when I was that age. So, but I never got to know what weaving is and what it means. I was doing my doctoral studies around what I call ENVC, or electronic nonverbal cues. And I wanted to learn more. Like, of course, like I studied communication and nonverbal communication a lot, but I wanted to learn a little bit more about it. So I came across this, and by the way, this one, I'm going to say something about it. This picture and other pictures that came across in the presentation, I didn't point them out. They are pictures of my own tapestry, by the way. But just like right now, I'm telling you why. So when I was studying, when I was reading that big encyclopedia about nonverbal communication, and too sad, this sentence was removed from there, from the one that was done in the 2020s, but like in the version of the 2010, these amazing scholars in nonverbal communication wrote, verbal and nonverbal behaviors are like strands in a tapestry, inextricably intertwined. Again, using the tapestry and the weaving as a metaphor. They aren't isolated structures, but rather form a unified communication system in which nonverbal signals are closely synchronized and integrated with language to form a complex whole. I understood the words, I didn't understand the meaning. And I was following Irene a thread of curiosity in the literal and metaphorical sense. I was like, but what does weaving entail? What is a tapestry? Like, I've seen tapestries in museums, like the ones that I talked about before. But what does it really mean to weave? What does it really mean? And I started watching YouTubes and Googling and following this thread of curiosity and going back to my childhood. Have I ever seen a weaver? And I remembered, yes, I come from Lebanon originally. And in Lebanon, there are certain villages where traditional weavers still weave. And when I was 4 years old, my parents took me there. And they had the loom that they would change the thread with their feet. I didn't know it was called a shed, but I heard the clicking of those changing sheds. And I was trying to draw from my memory, and all of this came back while I'm trying to contemplate what weaving entails. I didn't know what it means, and I wanted to know what it means. So I started Googling, and I started reading in the literature, and then I said, you know what? I am going to teach myself how to weave a tapestry, and this is going to be my dissertation tapestry. So I assumed the role of being a researcher weaver and a deeper learner, because as a deeper learner, I was experiencing moving from I have no idea of that is, no clue, and I want to learn it. And little by little, it was building, just like the finger weaving and the weaving that I did yesterday. I keep learning. I want to learn how to weave now. But as a researcher, I assumed the role of a researcher weaver, and I expanded my methodological approach. That's how much you can integrate it into academia. So I started from, and that's why I talk about stories, from narrative inquiry to reflexive narrative to artography. I expanded my methodology. My interaction with information was not only cognitive, it was drawing from multiple knowledge systems. It was an embodied knowledge. I embodied what I was studying, and I was studying nonverbal communication. I learned what loom I should break, and that is my hand. I learned the verbiage, like the words. I learned that these are the handles that I was moving in my hand. And my kids watched me like months, just learning how to weave. And this is my loom, and this is me weaving. I just want to point out a little thing here, speaking of neurodivergent people. When I wove this part here, you see it, the part with the head and with the circle here? I was weaving it, and my neurodivergent son came right behind me. He was just like crossing. He was crossing, and they see things that we do not see, right? So he was just crossing, crossing, and he looked and he said, "Oh, you just wove a heart." And I told my John, "Where do you see the heart? You see, I have always been saying, even since my proposal, that I'm following my heart." I said, thread of curiosity, but I'll tell you that I was following my heart. And I was following, what does it mean to teach from the heart? Without knowing, I did that thing. And then John told me, "Oh, you just wove the heart." And I didn't see the heart in my own weaving. I did not see it. John saw it. And I was like, "Where's the heart?" And he came and he showed it to me. And that was a big moment for both of us. I learned how to, I have background in art. I learned how to dress the loop. That was a very loopy thing that I needed to do. And you can see how much I changed, right? Like during the process, because it was a lengthy process. And while I was learning it, it inspired my methodology, but it inspired the research design that I followed. It looked exactly like this one. And later on, I learned that I learned how to weave, but first I was putting those, what do you call them? Oh my gosh, I forgot right now. The fringe. I was putting the fringe, right? Like this fringe at the bottom. These are separate tiny little threads that are separate, right? And I looked at them as the stories of my participants. that came as separate, but once engaged in the research, they started being woven together until they ended up being a big whole, one big research paper about my topic. All right, and this is not the whole dissertation tapestry. I'm going to show it to you later on, but you can see how the threads are separate, and that's what makes the tapestry. What makes a tapestry and what makes it different than a weaving is that in the weaving you have one continuous thread, whereas in the tapestry, and I wouldn't have learned this stuff if I didn't do it myself, right? Sorry. So I started learning and seeing the resemblance and enacting the metaphor that I was trying to learn about. It seems that some of us are still sick. I used a fork from my kitchen instead of a beating, like a beating comb. Actually, I ordered one and it never arrived. It was returned to the States. But while I was studying the nonverbal communication, I understood that not only that, if you want, like a quote from Burgoon and colleagues, but I also started going a little bit creative and inventing things. For example, I learned that those vertical threads, they are called warp, and the horizontal threads that I'm putting are called weft. So I thought that the warps represented the nonverbal and the weft represented the verbal. So the verbal cannot exist without the nonverbal because it's very impossible for me to put the colored thread if I didn't have the warp. So I understood what they meant by nonverbal when they say they are inextricably intertwined. Like my voice, my word does not come without my voice. In the same manner, when I type, it doesn't come without another nonverbal category, which is the timing when it was written, right? So I started understanding my topic, and then I started experimenting. Okay, so if the thread does not exist without the warp, can the warp exist without the thread, without the other like weft? And I did. And if you see that human face, that is woven negatively. That is the absence of threads. And that is how we become as human and we understand meaning even in the negative space and in the silence. So it expanded my knowledge, it expanded my understanding. And these are just like few of the things that I learned throughout. And by learning all of that, I developed as a deeper learner. And one of the things that I'm going to give you, just like a little bit of a preview for Wednesday session, is that deeper learning. If you want the description that I adopt for deeper learning, is that it emerges at the intersection of identity, mastery, and creativity. So I moved from not knowing anything at all into becoming myself a deeper learner and a researcher weaver, which I'm going to talk about more next time. But it didn't go without mistakes. For example, here you can see to the left, and I wrote shukran in Arabic because this is my native language, right? And I reconnected with my identity as a Canadian of Lebanese heritage as well. I tried certain things that didn't really work well, and one of them was this one here. I wanted to do the circle, and I tried to weave it like that, and it became a disaster. So I unwove it. But I like to put all my mistakes because it's a part of my learning. It's a visible imprint of my learning, and how can I help my students who are teachers as well to become deeper learners, and even to help their students become deeper learners. I think I used all the time, but I think we have probably 1 minute if somebody wants to add something.